Hello friends, welcome back. In this video, we'll discuss all about @requestParam annotation. So guys, after watching this video, you would be able to answer any question on @requestParam annotation. Alright, so guys, that being said, let's begin the video. Now guys, let's talk about the topics that we are going to cover in this video. So first of all, we'll talk about what is query parameters. Then we'll see @requestParam annotation. How can we use @requestParam annotation to extract the query parameters from the URL. Okay. Then we'll talk about request parameter name. Then we'll discuss how to handle multiple query parameters, like how to extract multiple query parameters from the URL. Okay. Then we'll see how to handle multiple query parameters using Java map. Okay. Then next we'll discuss how to handle multi-valued query parameters using Java list. Then we'll talk about optional query parameter. Then we'll see how can we handle optional query parameter by using Java 8 optional class. In the end, we'll see how to define a default value for an optional query parameter. Alright guys. Now let's talk about query parameters. Okay. So guys, you might have seen these kind of URLs where you have question mark and then some parameter with some values. Right. For example, if you see here, we have got question mark ID equals to 1, right? If you look at this particular endpoint where we have name equals to Supergirl, right? Here we have two parameters, ID and name, right? So guys, these kind of parameters are known as query parameters. Why? Because we use the value supplied with this parameter to fetch some data. For example, if you look at this particular endpoint, what it says that we are trying to fetch a user information where ID value equals to 1. If you look at this particular endpoint where we are trying to fetch the user information where name equals to Supergirl, okay? So guys, wherever you see question mark and some parameter with some values, it means you are dealing with query parameters. I hope this is clear. Let's move. Now guys, next question is how to extract the value from the query parameters. So if you see here, we have got one query parameter, which is ID and value is 1. Here we have got two query parameters, right? So now guys, the question is how can we extract the value from these query parameters? So guys, to extract the value from the query parameters, we use something called @requestParam annotation. Okay, guys, let me do one thing. Let me start the IDE. Let me give a demo. So guys, I already have a project called user REST API. Okay, and I have a controller. I already have a function to get all the users. Okay, so let me start this application. Let me show you how it looks like at the moment. So the application is started on port number 8080. Now guys, what I will do, I will use Postman. So there's a tool called Postman to test the REST APIs. Okay. So guys, for this demo, we'll be using Postman to test all the endpoints. Okay. So guys, if I go here, this is the endpoint to extract the user information, to get the list of all the users. Okay. So I'm going to test this endpoint on Postman. So I'm going to create a new request. Here I will put the endpoint, which is localhost /8080/API/users. And I'm going to make a get call. Okay, let me click on send. So guys, what do you see here? Here we have got the list of all the users. So basically in our list we have got only 4 users, and here we can see all the 4 users. Okay, all right guys, let me show you the list. So if I go here you can see that I have one static list. Okay, and I've got 4 users in the list. All right guys, now what we'll do here, we'll talk about request param. Okay, right? So say for example, I want to fetch user by using user ID. Okay, so guys, our endpoint will look something like this: http://localhost:8080/API users. Okay, users, then user question mark ID equals to 1. Okay, so guys, here ID is what? It's your query parameter. So we'll try to read the value of this particular query parameter in our function. So I will create a method here, public user get user by ID. Okay, now guys, to read the query parameter from the URL or from the endpoint, I'm going to use @requestParam annotation. Okay, and I will use string ID here. All right, let me do this out here. Okay guys, now I will write return, then I will use service dot, there is a function called get user by ID. I'm getting from the URL from the endpoint as a string value, so I will just convert into integer dot parse int. I'll pass ID semicolon. So guys, I already have a function in our service layer. What I'm doing here is I'm iterating through the list of users and I'm matching the ID. So the ID of the user, if it matches with the supplied ID, give me the user. Okay. Now guys, let's go and add the get mapping @get mapping on slash user. Okay. Let me stop our application and I'm going to restart. Right click, run as Spring Boot application. Okay, so our application is started. Let's go to Postman. I'm going to create a new request. I'll pass the endpoint here. So endpoint is http://localhost:8080/API/users/user. Okay. Now guys, here in Postman you can pass the query parameters. Here you can see, right? So I'll pass ID and value I'll pass 1. Okay. So guys, here also in the endpoint you can see ID equals to 1 added automatically. Okay. Let me click on send. So guys, here I can see the information of user 1. First name, last name, email, everything, and status code as 200. Okay. Alright guys. So basically our program is working perfectly fine. By using @RequestParam, we can read the query parameters from the endpoint. Alright guys. Let's move. Now guys, next is request parameter name. So guys, this comes into picture when the variable name is different from the query parameters. So guys, if you see here in this endpoint, the name of query parameter is ID equals to 1. But say for example, in our code, in the method, you want to use your local variable name as user ID. So there's a difference, right? Here we have ID and in our code we are using user ID. So in this situation where we have mismatch, we need to use request parameter name like this, name equals to ID. There are multiple formats. You can use name equals to ID, or you can use value equals to ID, or you can simply pass the value @RequestParam and inside double quotes you pass the query parameter name. Okay, so guys, let me give you a demo. Let's go back to the IDE. So guys, what I will do, I will simply copy the same function and I will comment out this portion for now. Okay, so what I will do, I'll just paste this one here. So guys, here we are talking about request param name. Okay, so guys, what I will do, say I want to use user ID in our code. Okay, let's see the behavior first, how it behaves. ID, and here also I'll pass ID, here also I'll change it to ID. Okay, this http://localhost:8080/API user ID equals to 1. Okay, so this is the endpoint, but if you see query parameter name is ID, but in our function I'm calling it user ID. Variable in our function is not matching with the query parameter name. Let's see the behavior. I'll stop our application and let me just restart. Okay, started. Let's go to the Postman. So guys, I'll the same endpoint, okay, where ID equals to 1. So basically I am passing ID as 1, but if you see bad request, status 400, okay. And if you go to the console, here you will see that missing request parameter exception. Required request parameter is user ID, for method parameter type string is not present. So guys, our code is looking for a parameter called user ID, but what we are getting from the endpoint, we are getting ID. So guys, for example, if I go here and if I change this value to user ID, okay, our parameter name, and if I send the request, I see the result, right? I hope you guys are getting it, right? So if there is a mismatch, your code won't work, right? So what you can do is, to avoid this kind of situation, you can use name equals to and then the variable. So guys, what is happening here is we are trying to map the ID variable from the query parameter to this particular variables. Okay, now guys, if I stop our application and if I pass ID in the endpoint, I'll still see the result. Let me just run our application. Okay, let's go back to Postman. Now guys, what I will do, I will change the query parameter name to ID only. Okay, ID. Here you can see ID equals to 1, right? But in our code, calling it user ID. Okay, so from endpoint it's coming as ID. Let me submit the request. Here I see the result. From endpoint it's coming as ID, but in our code we have used user ID. There is a mismatch, but our code is still working. Why? Because here we have used query parameter name. We have provided the mapping of this particular variable with our local variable, with our method variable. Okay. For example, if I pass 2 here, I can still see the result. User 2, first name, last name. I can pass 3 and let me just hit the request. This particular thing, request parameter name, can be done multiple ways. Either you can use name, you can use value, or you can simply use double quotes and the query parameter name. Try these options yourself. I will simply write here request parameter name equals to id, which I have just explained, right? What else you can do? You can try value equals to id, or what you can do is you can simply pass the parameter name. Okay, so guys, you can try these two yourself. All right, let's move. Now next is multiple request param. So guys, so far we have seen we were using only one parameter, id only, right? Say for example we want to pass id and there is another parameter called name. Then how can you read multiple parameters, multiple query parameters from the endpoint? Okay, so guys, let me show you. So guys, what I will do, I'll comment everything from here. Okay, so guys, now we'll talk about multiple query parameters. So guys, our endpoint would look something like this: http localhost 8080 / API users, now /user id equals to 1 and name equals to Kara, right? So guys, what do you see here? This is your endpoint, and here after there are two parameters. One is id, second one is name. Okay, so let's see how are you going to retrieve get users. So this time I will create a function called get user by id and name. Okay, now guys, you know that how can we retrieve the value of id, just one parameter. What do? You use request param here, and then use string id. Simple, right? Now guys, to read the next parameter, you will use another request param annotation, and string variable name is name. Okay, what I will do, I will sys out. Alright guys, now let's write return service dot get user by id and name. I'll pass the id here, so I will just parse integer dot parseInt, and here I'll pass id and name as it is. Okay, now let's go and add the get mapping get mapping on /user. Okay guys, so basically to read multiple query parameters, we have used multiple request param. Okay, let me stop and restart our application. Spring Boot app. Okay, so let's go to Postman. I will create another request. Guys, I will do one thing. I'll go here and I'll copy the endpoint so that I can save some time. Okay, and I'll go to Postman. I will paste the endpoint here. So here you see id equals to 1 and name equals to Kara. Click on send. So guys, what do you see here? You see the details of the user 1, first name, last name, email. And if I go and show you console, here also you can see id equals to 1 and name equals to Kara, right? So guys, basically to read the multiple query parameters, you have to use @request param multiple times. All right, let's go and test for second user. I'll pass id equals to 2 and name as Alex. Okay, click on send. So here you see second user information. Okay, I hope this is clear. Alright guys, let's move. Now next is multiple query parameters using map. So guys, just now I have explained that you can use multiple request param to read the multiple query parameters. Okay, but guys, there is one more way. So what I will do, I will simply comment this code. Okay, let me just copy everything from here. I will paste here. So guys, here I want to use Java map to read multiple query parameters. Okay, so guys, our endpoint something like this: http localhost 8080 /API /user id equals to 1 and name equals to say Kara. We also want to fetch email id as well. Okay, email equals to kara@supergirl.com. Simple. So basically this time we have got 3 query parameters, right? So guys, we want to fetch the multiple query parameters by using map. I'm using Java map. Okay, string. So key is also string and value is also string. Let's go and import Java util package, right? Now guys, here, so what I will do to read the id, I will use all params dot, I'll pass the key. So key is id. Okay, to get the name, I will use dot get. So here the key is name. Okay, and for email id, I will use all params dot get. Here the key is email. All right guys, now here what I will do guys, I'll simply pass id, and for name I will simply pass the entire thing as it is. Okay, So guys, here I'm not passing the email to fetch the user information. That you can do yourself. You can modify this particular function to have email as well as part of your where clause. Okay, but here what I want to explain, I want to explain how can we use map to read the multiple query parameters. Alright guys, so what I will do, I'll stop our application and let me restart. Okay, so this is done. Let's go back to Postman. I will go and create another request. I'll type the endpoint http colon double slash localhost colon 8080 slash API users and user. Okay guys, this time I have to pass three query parameters. So ID is one, then next one is name, and here I will pass value as Kara. Then next is going to be email. Okay, so I'll pass the email ID here, kara@supergirl.com. Okay, so guys, if you look at the endpoint, here we have got multiple query parameters. Basically, we have got three parameters that we need to read. Okay, so I'll submit the request, and here I see the result. Okay, now guys, let's go to console. I just want to see the values that we have supplied. So here you see ID equals to 1, name equals to Kara, email is kara@supergirl.com. So these are the parameters that we supplied, okay, by Postman. Here you can see, right? So guys, basically here it proves that by using map also we can read multiple query parameters. Alright guys, so we are done with this. Let's move. Now guys, next is multi-value parameter using list. Okay, so guys, say for example you have got ID and you have passed multiple values 1 2 3 4 5 in one variable. Okay, so basically it's a list of values. How can you handle? We'll do that by using Java list. Okay, so let me just go back to the IDE. So guys, here we'll talk about data from multi-valued query parameter. Okay guys, so what I will do guys, I'll comment this part for now, and here I'll create the endpoint first, http colon double slash localhost. So say for example ID equals to 1 2 3 and 4. Okay, so basically the query parameter is only one, but there are multiple values 1 2 3 4. Okay, so what I will do, let's go and get a function first. Public, this time will fetch list of users. Okay, so I will create a function called get user list, right, and we'll come back to return in a moment. Let's go and add the get mapping first. At the rate get mapping, I will pass user. Okay, now here I will use at the rate RequestParam to read the ID, right, but the data, if you see, I'm going to store this data in a list of integer values. So what I will do, I will use list of integer and I'll call it all params. Okay, now let's go back to return service.get user list, and here I'll pass my list. Okay, so guys, if I go to this particular function, I already have an implementation. What I'm doing here is I'm iterating through the list of users, and if my all params list contains this user ID, give me the list of users. Okay, I'm updating in the user list. So this is the very basic implementation. You guys can go through it. Let me just do one thing. Let me do this out here. User ID equals to plus all. Alright guys, so what I will do, let me stop our application and let me restart so that we can test this particular scenario as well. Okay, so I'll copy the endpoint. Yeah, let's go to Postman. I'll create new request. I'll pass the endpoint here. So guys, here you can see ID query parameter but having multiple values 1 2 3 4. Let me just make a get request. So guys, here it says bad request, status 400. Why? Let's go back to the code. Now guys, if you see here, the parameter which we are passing is ID, but here we are using all params, right? I hope you understood the reason, right? So what we have to do is we need to use request param name. Okay, so I'll stop and quickly restart our application. So guys, in case of difference in the query parameter and in the method variable name, make sure to use the request param name. Okay, so our application is started. Let's go back to the Postman. I'll simply click on send request, and this time I want to see the list of users 1 2 3 4, right? So guys, this is how you can use list to read multiple values from a query parameter. All right, let's move. Now guys, next is optional request parameters. So basically if you see here in this particular endpoint, we are using ID equals to 1, and name equals to Supergirl. Now say for example name is an optional parameter. It may or may not be there, right? So how can you make sure that this is a optional parameter? So what you can do is you have to use required equals to false. So this way you will come to know that this particular property may or may not available to you. Okay, so guys, let me give you a demo. Let's go back to IDE. What I will do, I will simply comment this code. Now here we are talking about optional query parameter. Okay, so guys, first I will type the endpoint. So say for example our endpoint is Krishna. We have got ID equals to 1 and name equals to Sikara. Now we know that name is optional. It may or may not be there, right? So I will simply create a function public user get user by ID or by ID and name. Okay, you guys can give it a better name. Here I will add a get mapping first, get mapping slash user. Okay, so guys, here so I will use @requestParam annotation to read ID comma @requestParam annotation to read the name. Okay, multiple query parameters, so we have used multiple request param to read ID and name. Okay, we know that name can be optional, right? It may or may not available. So what we'll do, we'll use required equals to false. So when you use required equals to false, it means that you have to write a condition on name. It may or may not available to you, right? So what I will do, I will first write a sysout here. Sysout, say if name is not null, okay, and name dot length is greater than 0, it means that we have got name as well. User equals to null. Here I will do user equals to service dot get user by ID and name, because name is not null, right? So basically there is a value in name and we have got ID as well. So what I will do here, I will simply parse integer dot parse int and here I'll pass ID. So guys, to fetch the user information we are using ID and name both. Okay, and in case if name is not available, what I will do, service dot get user by ID, because I know that name is not there, it's an optional parameter, right? So I'm fetching the user information just by using ID. Simple, right? Let's go and return user, right? All good. Let me start our application and we'll test the scenario. Right click, run as Spring Boot application. So guys, point is a query parameter is optional. We use required equals to false. Okay, so here our application is started. Let's go to Postman. I'll create a new request. Let me pass the endpoint http://localhost:8080/API user. Okay, so guys, here I will pass first both of the arguments, ID equals to 1 and I will also pass name, and here value I'll pass Kara. Okay, click on send. So what do you see here? You have got a result. Okay, so if you go to console, you will see both of the values. ID has 1, name has got value Kara. Okay, now because name is optional, right? So what I will do, I'll go here, I'll uncheck name. So here you can see in endpoint we just have only one query parameter, which is ID. Okay, click on send. Still you see your data. Okay, so let's go back to console. What do you see here? ID equals to 1 and name equals to null, because we did not pass, it's an optional value, right? So basically guys, you have to make sure that you use required equals to false property with @requestParam annotation to make the parameter as optional. Alright guys, I hope this is clear. Now guys, next is Java optional. So guys, just now we have used required equals to false to make a query parameter as optional, but there is one more way. What you can do is you can use Java optional class. So if you look at this particular example, so here instead of using required equals to false property, I am using an optional string. Okay, so guys, let's go back to IDE. Let me give you an example. I'll simply comment out this particular portion. Okay, so we'll talk about Java 8 optional to make a query parameter is optional. Okay, so what I will do here, I'll use everything same, but instead of using required equals to false, what I will do, I'll remove, and here I will use optional string of type optional. Let's go and import option. Option is from java.util. Okay, So if you go here, you see that optional is a class in Java 8. Okay. Now guys, how to read the value of optional, right? That is the question. So what I will do, I will use optional dot. There is a function called is present to check whether this particular option variable has got some value or not. If is present is true, it means option has got some value. So we'll use optional variable dot get function to get the value from the optional object. Okay, simple. So here I will write optional name. Okay, so our endpoint would look exactly same as earlier. Localhost colon 808 name equals to Kara. Now name is optional, right? So let me stop our application and we'll see that how can we handle optional query parameter using Java 8 optional class. Okay, so let me just start our application. This is nice. Let's go to Postman, create a new request. I'll paste the endpoint here. Sorry, I'll just type the endpoint here /API/user/user. Okay, now here we are talking about optional. So guys, for the first time I want to pass both of the parameters, id and name both. Id has got value 1, name has got value called Kara. Okay, click on send. Here I see the data is coming properly. So let's go back to the console and here you can see id equals to 1 and optional name has got optional and then the real value. Okay, so guys, if you look at this particular code here, I've used name.get to get the real value. So if you see here, the value is optional Kara, but to get the real value, which is Kara, the name of the user is Kara, right? So we are using optional.get. Okay, now guys, let's go back and I want to, because it's optional, right? I simply want to pass ID and let me just test our application. So you still see the data, you still see the user information, right? Let's go back to console and here what do you see? ID equals to 1 and optional name equals to optional.empty because we did not pass any value in the name parameter. Okay, we hope this is clear. Let's move. Now guys, next is default value. In case if you want to specify a default value for a query parameter, you can do that too by using default value property. All right. So guys, let me just go back to the IDE and let me give you a demo for this one as well. So guys, let me just comment and here I will simply create a function public user get default user. Okay. So here I will write @get mapping on /user. Okay, now say guys, for example, here I'm using @RequestParam. I want to use ID, comma, I'll pass another RequestParam string email. Okay, now what I will do here in return service.get user by ID and here I will pass integer dot. So guys, here with the RequestParam, I'll pass a property called default value equals to double quotes bracket close and here I will pass chat dot okayjava@gmail.com. So this is the default email ID if it is not supplied. Okay, so guys, what I will do, I'll simply stop and let me just restart our application. I'll simply click on send. If I go and check the console, ID equals to 1, email equals to default value. So if you go to the endpoint, you see we supplied only one value, ID. We did not pass the email. Okay, but I can still see the default value. Okay, now guys, let's go and supply email. So what I will do here, I will pass email and I will pass supergirl.com and if I click on next, I see everything is good. Let's go to console and here this time I see ID equals to 1 and email equals to the value which we supplied. Okay, so guys, this is how you can go and specify a default value for a parameter. Alright guys, I hope it is clear. Alright guys, so in this video we discussed everything about @RequestParam annotation. Alright guys, now in case of anything, just let me know in the comment section and please do subscribe my channel. Thank you.